Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News, or our monthly Ethereum and DeFi update with our friend Anthony Sassano. How are you today, Anthony?
Hey mate, I'm good. Good to be back. A lot happening, lots to talk about today.
Absolutely. Every month we sort of think that it's been bigger than the last month, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I guess that's the DeFi space growing. So we surpassed 3 billion, and then a few days later we surpassed 4 billion locked up in DeFi. A couple of other stats here. Maker, 1 billion locked. So that's the biggest protocol. 1inch, which is the DEX aggregator. It brings it all together. They passed $1 billion in volume. So these are starting to get some pretty big numbers, really challenging the centralized exchanges, aren't they?
Yeah, I think the one common theme across all of this over the last month is just the volume growth in decentralized exchanges. So you mentioned 1inch that aggregates together these decentralized exchanges, having over $1 billion in volume over the lifetime. But even protocols like Uniswap are doing like volumes. I think Hayden Adams, the founder, tweeted out that Uniswap's now doing more volume than Coinbase, which is truly insane, right? When you think about it, and Uniswap's not the only one. There's a bunch of other protocols as well that are doing just record volumes, and they're actually, they're not at the same level of centralized exchanges yet, but they're growing, and that's the main thing to focus on.
Yeah, and I think it's just even little subtle changes. So people that might have used Ether Delta back in the day, where it was kind of that 2 clicks, it was a bit confusing. You had to get some Ethereum into the platform and then another transaction to actually swap, and that took time. That was all really clicky and confusing. Where just the simple act of just swapping one token for another, so it's 1 click, and then it might take a bit of time, but it shows up. Just those little things, the user interfaces, it's quite literally faster to buy a token than if you hear about a little coin and you think, oh, it's only on that exchange. I've got to sign up KYC, send over Bitcoin or ETH, and the network's a bit slow. If you're already all set up with your Ledger or your MetaMask, it's literally quicker to do. So we have made a better experience than the centralized exchanges, haven't we?
Yeah, I think so. The experience, I mean, yes, the gas costs and like the fees on Ethereum right now are quite high, so it doesn't make sense for maybe smaller trades. But in general, yeah, it's much faster. Like using MetaMask, if you got some ETH in there, you can basically buy any token you want on these decentralized exchanges. And the beauty is, a lot of them do actually have liquidity to trade as well, because anyone can provide liquidity to these, and then the trading fee. So it really speaks to the power of like having an open platform instead of a closed platform that people can get involved in.
Yeah, and maybe we should talk about those challenges or the things that we still have to improve on, as you say. So we've still got to get money into the ecosystem first, which at the moment there's a few little projects. So ones that I've been reading about were Transact by Consensus, Banxa, Tether, so local Bitcoins, local Ethereum, local crypto. There's a few little sort of peer-to-peer ones. So there's different ways to get money into the ecosystem. That's still not that user friendly, I'd say, compared to some of the exchanges. But that is again something that is being tried to be solved, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is, I guess, what we call fiat on ramps, right? Going from, guess, your Australian dollars or your US dollars into, whatever, Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever other thing you want to go into. That's definitely the biggest friction still, and actually the highest cost, I think, because the fees are quite high on these centralized exchanges from going from fiat to crypto. Unfortunately, there are some that offer a much better deal. It depends on how much you're buying. But yeah, once you're past that point and you basically have some ether in your MetaMask or something, from there on it's basically smooth sailing. There's really not much friction. Yes, the I guess like the user experience is depending on the protocol you use is confusing for new users. But other than that, if you kind of know how to use these things, just having ETH in your wallet is 1,000 times better than interacting with a centralized exchange.
Yeah, and I hope I guess the fees come down and it does get a little bit more competitive in that space. I'm sure it will, like all things. But once you're in that ecosystem and we can start to mint stable coins, and that's probably the next thing to talk about that we'll get to about the credit scores on Aave and Lend and all these protocols. So the money is just expanding that's in the system, and once you're in there, you're kind of in there for good. But the next thing we have to solve, like you said, is the fees and the scalability. And Ethereum's obviously congested. We've increased the block size again. So, do you want to maybe just give a really quick recap? Because we did explain that in detail in the last episode, and all of these are time stamped as well, guys, if you want to go rewatch old months.
Yeah, so recently, I guess we spoke about it last episode about how the block gas limit can be kind of raised by the miners. This is effectively like a block size increase on Ethereum. So they raised it again, only slightly this time. They went from 12 million to 12.5 million, whereas last time they went from 10 to 12 million. So it was a bigger increase. And this doesn't seem to have actually helped at all with the congestion. It's kind of like building more lanes on a highway and expecting it to help. Well, there's a concept of induced demand where you give people more things to work with, like more lanes to drive on, they're just going to fill it up. So we've given more people, we've given people more gas to work with on Ethereum, more capacity, and they've just filled it right up because there's just so much demand. So yeah, I don't think that's a very viable solution going forward. I don't think we should raise it anymore. I think, as you said, the layer 2 tech scalability that's coming online with a bunch of different projects working on it is basically what's going to get us, solve these high fee problems and these congestion issues for users at least. I think the layer 1 Ethereum is always going to be kind of like more like not expensive, but always be, I guess, like full, like because there's just so much that people want to do on these systems.
Absolutely. So I feel the newer scaling solutions that have come out more recently, the Scale have put out their mainnet. Any others that you've been reading over? I mean, we've spoken about Amisi Go and Plasma, Raiden a couple of times. Synthetics have got their optimistic that they did the trial, their trading competition. What else do we have? Loopring Pay. So these are the sort of things where they're being implemented, thousands of transactions a second, private transactions in a lot of cases, and we're just waiting for all the other dApps to, I guess, integrate these, aren't we?
Yeah, I think at this point, the technology is basically out there. There's not many new platforms going live. It's basically we're working with what we've got and we're refining and making it better, increasing adoption for those solutions. Like you mentioned, a few of them, like Loopring and Diversify have their roll up exchanges that are live today, and they're just working on getting adoption now, building that liquidity. It's basically like starting from ground zero with in terms of like users and liquidity and trying to build that up over time. So it's going to take some time for us to get there. But yeah, you mentioned Scale, which is another solution that kind of like has gone live with their mainnet. But I think we discussed this last time where they're kind of what's considered a side chain. So that like a layer 2 Ethereum is different to what a side chain is. I'm not sure if we wanted to quickly go through what that was. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, for me the understanding is that it can be a different set of rules, but again, it's slightly different to Plasma, which can be a child chain of Ethereum and have a slightly different set of rules. So, is there an easy way to explain this? Because this is technical stuff.
Yeah, it gets quite technical, but the easiest way to explain it is basically when something is a layer 2 of Ethereum, it means that it's actually secured by the Ethereum-based chain. Whereas if something is a side chain to Ethereum, it means that it has its own security, and it's just like a kind of like different platform that Ethereum can bridge into. So if you were to send your ETH, from my understanding with Scale, if you were to send your ETH to Scale, then you're basically at the mercy of the security of the Scale network, for
Yes.
example. So you don't have the security of the Ethereum network anymore. It's just like sending your Ethereum to an exchange on Coinbase. You're at the mercy of Coinbase's security now, right? The Ethereum network is no longer securing your ETH because you don't own the keys. Coinbase owns them. So that's how I explain it typically.
Yeah, and whereas the difference being in Amisi Go, you can challenge, and we can report back to an Ethereum node and see what is right. That's the kind of way to think about it. And that kind of leads into the next thing I want to talk about, which is governance and challenging outcomes, because we've got a few different prediction markets that have sprung up. So Omen is one that's on Gnosis, and we've got Augur, which has now launched their version 2. So for those that don't know, Augur and Gnosis were the two big prediction markets that launched way back in, I think, 2016.
Yeah. So I guess Augur actually put out their V2 yesterday, I think. And as you mentioned, Omen built on Gnosis protocol as well. These prediction market platforms are going live. I think they've been in the works for a while, but unfortunately, they've come at a time when fees are very high. And to create an Augur market right now, I think it costs up to $100 just to create a market in fees, which is going to definitely hamper the adoption, unfortunately. So, these teams now have to basically look at layer 2 solutions, which may not work because, as you mentioned, with prediction markets, they need these governance systems in place to resolve a market. So if there's a dispute over what way a kind of bet should have gone, they need the strong security guarantees of the system that they're built on, like of Ethereum, to basically ensure that their outcome resolves as it should. So I'm not sure like what the kind of uptake of these markets are going to be, considering fees are so high going forward. It's unfortunate that's what they've launched into, but I think we're going to see some layer two prediction markets go live, and some different kind of, I guess, like implementations as well.
Yeah, I think there's another one I was reading about as well called reality cards. But I think what you've been writing about, Anthony, in some of your daily updates is the fact that this puts pressure on the teams. And you've almost got to go back to the drawing board and say, you know what? There's no point even launching it at the moment. If it's $100 to put on a $50 bet, let's go and implement optimistic roll ups, which we can scale our smart contracts and do this for a cent instead of $100. And then let's launch it. And it's a great customer experience. And that's what all these projects are sort of now got pressure to do that. And then they will get the users because they'll have the cheapest fees compared to their competitor that might not have scaled yet. So it's kind of I guess, a good way to force people to get their act together.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you're right. I've been writing about this and about how I actually think the high fees are quite healthy for Ethereum for a number of reasons. But one of the reasons, as you mentioned, is that it actually forces these developers to not just think like, oh, okay, the network's going to be cheap forever. I don't really care about layer two. It actually forces them to think, okay, the network's going to be expensive. It's not going to come back down. How do I actually build a product that is able to take advantage of the scalability solutions that are available? And that's why I'm really bullish on the scalability solutions now, because they've come at the right time. They just need developers and users to adopt them.
Yeah, and there was another thing that I was reading about here. It was How. So there's a little website called How, and you can set alerts for when the gas price gets cheap or when a certain liquidity pool or yield gets to a certain level. So that's pretty cool. I might link that down below. But without bashing Bitcoin too much, it's a very different conversation when Bitcoin is going to get full again. And I really wonder what's going to happen there, if that could be the catalyst for a big alt season in the sort of current C coins, because they don't have this conversation that we're having right now, where it's, oh yeah, there's half a dozen, there's all these teams working on this. It's kind of like, well, let's maybe get more exchanges to implement SegWit. Let's try and get a few more people on Lightning. But it really is not going to be that much of a solution, is it?
No, so this is a key difference between, I guess, the Bitcoin philosophy and the Ethereum philosophy, and it is basically what based on the limitations of the platform. So with Bitcoin, it's very, very limited with what you can build on top of it, of course. So they've kind of said, okay, well, since it's so limited, we're going to focus all our efforts on this one solution called the Lightning Network, right? And there's a few other things they're working on, but they're not, they won't scale a Bitcoin like the Lightning Network potentially could. And then they're also relying on exchanges too, as you mentioned, to, I guess they call them Bitcoin banks, where these exchanges act as the scalability. Well, not just exchanges, but like just any financial services, like centralized services, they act as this scalability arm for Bitcoin. Now that goes completely against what Ethereum is trying to do. Ethereum is trying to basically, I mean, as Ryan Sean Adams says, go bankless, get rid of these centralized institutions, don't, not rely on them. And we can do that on Ethereum because you can build much more on top of the base layer. It all comes with its own set of trade-offs, of course, and I won't run through all the trade-offs now, but I'm just, yeah, I mean, this is why I don't spend much time in Bitcoin. It's just like there's just not much you can do with it. It's you basically, you buy it, you hold it, like it's like a gold, I guess, a digital gold, as they like to call it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that can still be very valuable. Just if Bitcoin does do nothing else, that is still a very valuable use case. If governments are going to keep printing trillions of dollars, and Bitcoin at the moment's got the most liquidity and it's got the brand, it's most well known. So there's a lot of reasons why you could still be bullish on Bitcoin, and I am bullish on Bitcoin. But again, it's just, I'd love it to be competition where Bitcoin are trying to implement and really openly happy to work with Ethereum, and even imagine Bitcoin devs helping Ethereum scale because they want to help do more wrapped Bitcoin or private Bitcoin on ETH and all that sort of thing. Whereas it's just not really happening, the relationship there.
Yeah, I guess like it depends. So like I guess you could call them like the hardcore Bitcoiners or the quote unquote Bitcoin maximalists don't like to play friendly with other platforms. But there are some who I guess would consider themselves like a Bitcoiner, but they're really interested in working with Ethereum or working on Ethereum. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of Bitcoin actually migrate over to Ethereum to tap into the DeFi ecosystem. So I think that's just going to be inevitable. And I actually put a tweet out a few weeks ago that kind of got a few people upset, where I said that I actually think it's kind of like bearish that Bitcoin is leaving, that BTC is leaving the Bitcoin network for Ethereum, because Bitcoin relies on transaction fees for security in the terminal state, right? When the block rewards kind of like run out. So, but if all the BTC transactional activity is happening on Ethereum, then what's happening on Bitcoin, right? It's it's a bit of a theory I've got, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think we've got a few years until we have to worry about that. Yeah, but something to keep in the back of your mind. In terms of DeFi and the growth, I probably wanted to mention the risks, because I do think that we'll probably see a big hack or bug or something. It's almost like everything is going too well and it's growing too fast. In terms of the investing as well, I did a video about how I think that DeFi is getting bubbly in some areas, and you've got to be mindful. Like I said last week, there was a couple of tokens now like Synthetics and Aave that have done 100x from when we covered them and invested. And you've got to take some profits. And we've got people that are charging into this space and they're seeing that and they're saying, oh, that went up 100x, I want to buy that one. And they're making the sort of noob mistakes. Then last week we had the Wi-Fi token. Officially it went up 100x, but I think the first few trades were at $3, so it did 1000x for those first few people. And again, people were charging into our group saying, where do I buy this thing that's gone up 1000x? And that's not really when you want to be buying something. So guys, take a deep breath. This is kind of like the ICO space all over again, when the charts look like this and people are coming in to buy. But then you've also got the other risk of a hack, or anything could go wrong. And the news cycle is going to jump all over that. The maximalists are going to jump all over that on Twitter. So I'm just really cautious that it feels like everything's going too well at the moment.
Yeah, I made a comment yesterday on Twitter that I guess we're kind of recreating the 2017 ICO bonanza with liquidity mining now, right? With the hype feels the same. The returns are definitely very similar. People plowing in, as you said, after 1000x is not the time to be doing it. The people, I guess, like the people selling after 1000x are the ones who bought like way earlier, right? And they're just kind of like selling into these new buyers, and that's why we have cycles, I guess, in the markets in general. But yeah, I guess to follow on from your point for new users, to be very cautious of not just what they're investing in, but what they're doing with these protocols. Like yield farming is obviously like a really hot meme right now, has been since comp launched, and it just keeps getting hotter. And people are advertising 1000% APY, right, on your money. But you really need to take a step back and actually think to yourself, it's not 1000 APY, it's annualized, right? So it could be 1000 APY annualized, but it only lasts a week. So in reality, it's not 1000 APY. It's much less than that because it didn't last very long. So I think when thinking about where to put your money or where to park your money, you needed to obviously consider your risk appetite. Would you be happy with all this money going to zero or losing it all? And are you happy taking that risk? If you are, then go for it. But if you don't understand it, then I think people really need to be careful with what they're doing with their money.
And it's like the ICOs. So people knew that you could buy them and flip them, and they went up. And now it was, then it's the IEOs. And now it's a little bit more difficult to learn how to do this. So it's kind of taking a bit of time. But it's the same thing again. And those numbers that Anthony's saying, a lot of the time that calculation is from the token. So I might be getting paid in the native token, and that's up so much. So the number looks like it's huge. But the next day when I get that, or when I go to a market to sell it, when the blockchain is congested, that price could have crashed 90% sort of thing. So there's all these numbers that look good on paper, but they really don't account for the true risk or the price, the liquidity. If you're a beginner, a lot of people I just saw in our group, they bought a token and now they don't know how to sell it, and they've mucked up their MetaMasks and all these different things. So it's why I say, guys, if you don't know what you're doing, you should not be buying these things in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the APY coming from the tokens themselves, because unless you realize that gain by selling the token, it really isn't 1000 APY, right? It could be 100% or even less than that. I mean, that's still good, but I mean, you really need to weigh up the fees that you're paying for this as well, the opportunity cost of your capital too, like tax as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's a big thing that I don't think a lot of people think about. The tax implications of this are quite bad if you're doing a lot of active trading and you're not registered as a trader or anything. You're just registered as an investor.
I bet you there's a lot of tax agents out there that are glad that it's July and it's not June 30 now that this stuff's all taking off.
Yeah, exactly.
A few other dexes that have sprung up, 0x Matcha. Anything you want to add on that one, Anthony? Or just, yeah, there's heaps out there now, isn't there?
Yeah. I particularly like 0x Matcha because it's I guess it's like 1inch where it's a decentralized exchange aggregator, but it's really geared towards newbies, right?
Mm.
1inch is actually quite complex for new people. You go there, you look at the interface, you get scared really quickly because there's so many different toggles and buttons to press. Whereas 0x Matcha is trying to be, I guess you can call them the Robin Hood of crypto, where it's
Mm.
like a very nice interface, very familiar for people that have used other traditional kind of finance products. They can go there, they can quickly swap tokens, so swap from like ETH to DAI or ETH to another token, and get started like that with a really nice interface. And it tries to find the best price, just like 1inch does. And there's actually promotional periods on at the moment where sometimes the trade will be free in terms of gas. That they'll actually cover the gas cost for you, which is
So,
really cool.
yeah, so I'm just bringing that up now for people at home so they can see. So this is 1inch where you can choose what token you want to swap from to. It tells you the liquidity. Are you happy to source it from all the different dexes? What the slippage is going to be. Hopefully a lot of you have used this already. And then we'll just bring up 0x Matcha. Just to show people that this is, like you said, the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's just nice big buttons. What do you want to swap from to? One click, as long as you connect your wallet. So yeah, different ways of going about it, and we'll see who's the winner. Next up, I wanted to talk about, following on from that theme, there's a lot of money going in at the top end of town as well. So we saw Avalanche and Polkadot both do raises and get $40 million in like hours, which is nuts. Spencer, is it Dimwitty, only raised 10% of what he wanted, which was 13 million. So he only raised 1 million. But still, there's a lot of money pouring into these things. Very different to crypto winter.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised by how much Avalanche and Polkadot have been able to raise, considering that I thought like the layer one wars were kind of dead, like where it was like, okay, Ethereum is basically like, got so much of a lead that these other platforms are just not worth it. But I think like what's happened over the past couple months is definitely these platforms are like, oh, Ethereum has high fees. This is why we're building our one, right? Our one's going to be much more scalable. It's going to be able to do like things much cheaper, all these sorts of things. So they're playing on, they're basically taking the opportunity to advertise themselves. And I think a lot of new people getting into this space are falling for that. I think it's a trick, if I'm being honest, because a lot of these platforms are dishonest with their marketing when they say, oh, we can do, this much transactions per second, whatever. They're not telling you what the trade-offs of this are. They're not telling you that their platform is probably more centralized. You can't run your own node, like all these sorts of things. And I know like this is what Bitcoiners, I guess, have been harping on about forever, especially about Ethereum, which is quite ironic. But I think, it's definitely a sign that new money is flowing into me because, in 2020, I guess 19, when there was basically just like the diehards around, right? These platforms weren't really seeing much growth and they weren't raising much money. But I guess we're in a different market now.
And I think the conversation's changed from being an ETH killer to almost complementing ETH in some ways. And we've seen like Cardano come out and say that they're doing, I'm not sure what they call it exactly. Did you see this? It's like an ERC20 asset that they produce on their own chain.
I mean, I've been seeing this kind of narrative where they're saying, "Oh, we're a bridge to Ethereum, right? We're gonna like be a friend of Ethereum," which is another funny pivot.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, just on top of that, I think that is probably the opportunity where if you're really good at something or a side chain, you can interconnect with Ethereum. I think there's definitely opportunity there. But in terms of the protocol thesis, where the base layer protocols are going to accrue the value, I think we've kind of seen that start to happen. We were saying, why is Ethereum not going up and all these others are? And we predicted, I think, last episode that money and profits would rotate out of all these pairs because they're paired with Ethereum a lot of the time on all these dexes versus 2017 where they're all paired with Bitcoin on these different Bitrexes and Binances, and you have the cycle between Bitcoin and alt. So I think that is coming into play a little bit as well. But if you look at the value of all the top protocols, layer one, still $40 billion ish. And then you look at DeFi and ETH, probably just DeFi and all those protocols, they're still not that big. I think it's 4 billion total together. So there's a lot of room for growth when you consider what the market is valuing all these things that have got no apps a lot of the time or no activity versus these things that are just bursting and growing 1,000% month over month. So yes, it's a DeFi is getting bubble-ish, but there's still a lot of room for growth.
Yeah, I think in general the market is overvaluing the layer ones in all of them, and undervaluing, like, yeah, as you said, like the DeFi platforms on Ethereum and Ethereum itself. Really, I think there will be. I mean, I think it's already started with Ethereum started going up, right, or ETH started going up lately. Uh, and that's basically profits rotating from DeFi tokens back into ETH, which a lot of people were actually theorizing about. They're like, oh, is profit going to go back into ETH, or is it going to go into a stable coin? And it seems it's gone into Bitcoin too. So, this is just how it always plays out. There's cycles, there's money that goes from place to place. There are going to be some big winners in the DeFi space. Their tokens are actually going to accrue a lot of value, I believe. But I do think that when people are ready to cash out and they want to stay in the ecosystem, they're either going to a stable coin, which isn't very lucrative unless you're, like, I guess, doing yield farming with it, or they're going to ETH, right? Especially in the Ethereum space, which is really bullish for ETH long term, I think.
In terms of all that, I guess tying that conversation together, I do want to mention again Nexus Mutual. So I'm not sure if you saw some of the changes that they've had recently, but the governance, the tokens got together, voted on some changes in terms of the pool of capital and the ratios. And I actually think it's probably a little bit of short-term pain. We had a price pullback, but it's probably a good decision longer term what they want to do to prevent speculation so much. But that is a really important protocol. So I know there's lots of others out there to protect from risk, all the options platforms we've touched on. But in terms of actual insurance or cover for these platforms, we've seen that really been, well, basically they took up all the available insurance. So I think that that's why Nexus Mutual is one of my favorite projects, because this space is just begging for cover and insurance.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned options there. Options are not for new people to play around with. I don't think new people should be touching options at all, because you can get very, very wrecked by trading options if you don't understand them.
Yes.
So that's why Nexus Mutual is great, because you're not actually like doing speculative trading. You're just buying some cover. Like, I guess unless you buy the token, but most people are just buying cover. And it's a very straightforward process. This is how much the cover is going to cost you. You'll be covered for this long if something like this happens. So that's definitely a key piece of the DeFi kind of infrastructure. And as you said, it's their reserves are being topped out because there's just so much demand for people who want to protect their positions in DeFi.
Absolutely. Onwards to other scaling things. ETH2, we had the multi-client testnet. I think that's launching in a few days now on the 4th. Vitalik seems pretty relaxed about it all, which is always good. And then we had the coding for making ETH1 a shard of ETH2. Is that right? That's already underway?
Yeah, so I think we've spoken about this before, about how ETH1 will be merged into ETH2. And that work's actually being done in parallel to the ETH2 work.
Yes.
And there's actually and there was a tweet that came out that basically said that I think they got an ETH1 client talking to an ETH2 client, like a phase 1 client, which is when the merger is expected to happen after phase 1, like phase 1.5.
Cool. So that is right at the end of my knowledge. So apologies for stuttering on that one a little bit, guys. MetaMask version 8 is out. I've had a little bit of a play around with MetaMask. I think it's getting friendlier. I'd still say it is really hard to use for beginners. But any thoughts on that upgrade, or the space in general, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I have a soft spot for MetaMask because I've used it for so long, but it definitely is more of an advanced tool. It's not something that I think we're going to onboard the next kind of few million users with. I think that it's great. It's done a lot of good for the ecosystem, but yeah, it's even with their latest update, it's still not new user friendly at all.
I think our best hope is the Argents of the world, those mobile wallets where people don't realize what they're using. Yeah. Other scaling solutions, Axie Infinity, a little gaming project, said that they've got is it Ronin? Again, that is a side chain. So I spoke to Engine this month. They're part of the Ethereum documentary that we're recording. I spoke to Decentraland and Mana, OpenSea. So these are the NFT space, gaming space. I think that that's really coming a long way and still probably a little bit under the radar.
I think, yeah, I mean, they are coming a long way, but at the same time, I think that they've suffered the most from the high fees on Ethereum, in that to trade these game items, sometimes they'll only be worth a couple of dollars, but to trade them on Ethereum right now would cost you more than that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of put a hamper in their adoption. But you did mention that Axie Infinity are making their Ronin sidechain. And they actually plan to make it as a sidechain and then eventually turn it into a proper layer 2 on Ethereum, which is really cool. So, and then Gods Unchained, another game, they're actually looking to do a scalability exchange with Starkware, like a decentralized exchange on layer 2 with Starkware for their cards.
Yes.
So yeah, there is progress being made, but unfortunately they've been one of the casualties of the high fees lately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a play around with Decentraland the other day, and I was really blown away by that. So very cool. Check that out if you haven't already, guys. Other things on the agenda here, Ethereum Name Service. So for those of you that don't know, I did a video for members a year or two ago saying, if you want to have a bit of a speculation punt on whatever the hot names are going to be, you can buy the domains like .eth, like .com. And a lot of people bought these and they kind of changed the rules. So you couldn't just squat on these and not use them. And now it's coming up for tender. I think it's the 1st of August or any day now where a lot of those are going to be released back out unless you start to pay the $10 a year fee. And these people that bought hundreds of them, they probably don't want to sit and pay thousands of dollars a year because the names haven't really caught on or become valuable, and you would have outperformed it by buying ETH. So there's a lot of those that are going to be up for grabs. If you're interested, that could be something to take a look at.
Yeah, you explained it well. Basically, a lot of these older names are, I guess, like quote unquote expiring unless you renew it. So it'd be up for auction again. But I think you're right that the speculation around like ENS names hasn't taken off yet. So we might see a lot of them come into, from short-term speculators come into circulation. They just basically say, "Oh, I'm not going to renew it," or they actually forgot about it, right? Since it was so long ago.
Yeah, and again, just for the beginners to tie this together, for those that don't know, Ethereum Name Service is the ENS, and that's when we can buy nuggetsnews.eth, and I can send some Ethereum across to Anthony.eth, and we don't have to remember each other's addresses. And that's now being integrated with things like Coinbase. So Coinbase have actually been pretty friendly towards DeFi. I think we've said before that Brian Armstrong likes Ethereum and DeFi. And then you're going to see that in your Argent wallet that we just spoke about, and then MetaMask. So all these different things are sort of coming together. Hopefully you don't have to use those long addresses for too much longer.
Yeah, exactly. It's making progress. ENS is seeing adoption. I love telling people to send, ETH or DAI to sassel.eth, for example. Obviously there's privacy concerns here, as everyone can see what you're doing. So I don't do any of my normal activity on that address. But yeah, I think in general, it's much better than the long addresses that we see.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't even remember if I bought nuggetsnews.eth or let it go for that reason. It just wasn't much happening in that space at the time. I think that's most things I had on my list, Anthony. Oh, just quickly, the Twitter hack. I guess that was a massive event that kind of went under the radar a little bit. Just showing the importance of censorship and censorship-resistant platforms, and that's all coming, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny because the Twitter hack was like a huge deal, I thought, but then it fizzled out within a day, like the news cycle, because there's just too much to pay attention to right now. But yeah, it does speak to the fact that we want to basically decentralize these platforms so that, not one person can get access to all these accounts by compromising a centralized kind of like point of failure, I guess you could call it. So I'm looking forward to seeing if, there's a project that actually Twitter's working on to decentralize Twitter called Blue Sky, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, I think they're going to be using like kind of maybe a blockchain or maybe distributed tech there, but I'm not sure if there's been much news about that just yet, but it looks exciting.
Yeah, no, definitely walking away from it. Just quickly, a couple of things to finish off. Congrats to the guys at Sablier. So that was the streaming payments app I've spoken about. They got acquired by Mainframe yesterday, and Mainframe is another project that have sort of revamped themselves 9 months ago. So they're not just jumping on the DeFi bandwagon. That's cool. Aave, we spoke about the credit delegation where I can say I trust Anthony for him to get a loan and start to build credit scores and take those risks. Aragon and Kleros was another one. So this decision making over the outcomes and smart contracts and insurance. I just think that that's probably something we'll end up talking about a lot next month.
Yeah. This basically falls into the whole kind of like DAOs or decentralized governance on top of Ethereum. And this is what we saw, I guess, play out last week with the YFI token, where this token automatically had governance rights and people could vote and talk about proposals and things like that. And that's what's happening, I guess, like in the Aragon space and the Kleros space and things like this. It's basically bringing together a global community to make decisions at the end of the day.
I'm calling it Wi-Fi just because Y finance, but I'm not sure. We'll see. What are you calling it? Iffy. Wi.
I say Yiffy, and I don't know why. I think I'm the only one who says it like that.
It's hard to tell because everyone's on Twitter, so you don't know how people are pronouncing it. But anyway, that's everything on my list. That's been awesome. So much to get through. Let us know, guys, if there's anything that we missed in the comments or you want us to discuss next month. I'll put the links to Anthony's newsletter that he's started. That's free down below. And yeah, there's just so much happening. Hopefully, we can keep you guys up to date with everything.
Yeah. Awesome conversation again. I think next month, I've got no idea what's going to be in store for next month. It's just too crazy.
Hopefully, a lot higher prices if we can crack into this bull market. But fingers crossed. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks,
Cheers.
guys.